मुझे विश्वास है कि आप
Hello and welcome. I'm Asima Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. 85 Palestinians have been killed while seeking aid at UN aid trucks in northern Gaza, according to Hamas-run Gaza's health ministry. This is the highest toll among the repeated deaths near the aid centers. Japan's ruling coalition suffered a major setback in Sunday's upper house election, losing its majority and further weakening Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba's hold on power. Meanwhile, Ishiba has vowed to stay on as leader, citing an urgent August 1st deadline to strike a tariff deal with the US President Donald Trump. Russia has launched another wave of drones and missiles on Ukraine overnight, killing at least one person and igniting fires across Kyiv, according to the city officials and Mayor Vitaly Klitschko. Damage from the attack included a subway station, commercial properties, homes, and a kindergarten across 4 districts of the capital. Filipino President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will meet US President Donald Trump this week in Washington, hoping to secure a more favorable trade deal before the August 1st deadline. According to media reports, Prime Minister Marcos will be the first Southeast Asian leader to visit President Trump in his second term. China's foreign ministry has confirmed that President Xi Jinping will meet European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa in Beijing on Thursday, marking 50 years of diplomatic ties. Torrential rains have caused deadly landslides and flooding in South Korea, raising the death toll to 17. Meanwhile, South Korea's Unification Ministry said it is exploring ways to improve relations with North Korea, including the possibility of allowing individual tours into the North Korea, according to media reports. Alaska Airlines grounded all flights on Sunday temporarily after an undisclosed IT outage disrupted its systems, marking the second time in just over a year that it has grounded its entire fleet, while it has been reported that Alaska Airlines has now resumed its operations. Israeli forces launched a ground and air assault on Deir al-Balah in central Gaza, displacing thousands of civilians. The operation began early Monday, hours after evacuation warnings were issued for 6 residential blocks in the southwestern part of the city. Deir al-Balah is now home to many displaced people from Rafah and Khan Yunis. Israeli tanks and military vehicles advanced from the Kisufim checkpoint, hitting neighborhoods with artillery and airstrikes. Thousands fled to Al-Mawasi, a relatively safer zone. There are growing fears that the assault is part of a strategy to carve out a new military corridor, isolating the area from central Gaza. Now we are joined by Joshua Barnes. He's an anchor and correspondent at NewsX World. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this dire situation of Gaza and Israel?
Well, yes, the situation is dire, Asuma, in terms of the loss of life that's been seen on both sides. Of course, the October 7th attack sparking off this conflict between Israel and Hamas that has seen tens of thousands of Palestinians die in Gaza, according to local authorities. While those numbers are refuted, the displacement and the deaths at play, along with the humanitarian crises, is there to see. Charities, experts, all talking about the devastating situation on the ground. But this attack is significant. It's the first time in the 21-month war that this region has been hit. Reasons for that include the fact that hostages were believed to be held in this area. There are still around 50 hostages, both dead and alive, being held by Hamas in Gaza. Israel have been cautious to attack in areas that may have hostages being held because, of course, the potential ramifications on those hostages that are still alive in the region. The situation is continuing on the backdrop of diplomatic talks that have been ongoing, but seemingly no progress has yet been made. Optimism from the United States, optimism from Israel as well in recent days and weeks, talking about progress made in Doha, Qatar, where indirect talks between Israel and Hamas have been taking place. The highlight of this situation, of course, is the humanitarian aspect. We've seen protests in Israel in recent days talking about ending this war and getting those hostages released. This move will surely strike more of a chord with families, friends and loved ones with hostages still being held by Hamas. Of course, a potential risk to those hostages. While that risk is always there, of course, we know that Hamas have been holding these hostages, releasing videos throughout this war showing the state in which they've been, and also releasing hostages during that ceasefire period, and another single release brokered by the US for a US-Israeli hostage. We've seen the state of the hostages coming back frail, often looking a lot skinnier than they were when they were captured. The situation is extremely divisive, but it's extremely desperate for so many in both Israel and Palestine.
Thank you, Josh. Please stay with us now. We move on to our next news. The Israeli Defense Forces, known as the IDF, struck military targets at the Hodeidah port, belonging to the Houthi terrorist regime. The IDF targeted engineering vehicles, fuel containers, naval vessels, and other infrastructure used for military activities against Israel and global maritime trade. The port has been a hub for weapon transfers from Iran. The IDF remains committed to eliminating threats to Israeli civilians and will continue operating against any such threats, wherever they arise. Now we move on to our next news. Japan's Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba apologized after his ruling coalition lost control of the upper house in Sunday's elections. In a press conference, Ishiba accepted the harsh judgment and promised to stay in office to address pressing issues like U.S. tariff talks, rising prices, and Japan's security challenges. His party, the Liberal Democratic Party, won 47 seats, falling short of the 50 needed for a majority. Opposition leader Yoshihiko Noda is considering a no-confidence motion against the Prime Minister's government. Let's have a look at what the Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba had to say.
この優位な同志の方々、議席が得られなかったということは痛恨の極みであります。自由民主党総裁として心より深くお詫びを申し上げる次第でございます。私どもはこの結果について謙虚に真摯に受け止めなければならない。私ども自由民主党は極めて厳しい国民の皆様方のご審判をいただきました。今般の選挙結果に対する重大な責任を痛感しながらも、政治を停滞させないよう、漂流させないよう、地方の皆様方の声も丁寧に真摯にお聞きをしながら、比較大党としての責任、そして国家国民の皆様方に対する責任を果たしていかねばならない、このように。
For this discussion, we are joined by Stefan Nagy. He's a professor at International Christian University, joining us live from Budapest. Thank you, Professor, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, Prime Minister Ishiba has admitted to the harsh judgment from voters. And what does this reveal about the current state of Japanese politics and the public's trust in the government?
Well, this election followed the upper house and the failing of Prime Minister Ishiba to really deliver a concrete and victory is not only a statement on his poor leadership this time around, but he also lost in the lower house elections back in October 2024. So this is a track record. It's not an exception, and it demonstrates that the Japanese public are looking for leadership that can deliver economic results, security, and present a vision for Japan moving forward in the future. Lastly, and I think importantly, this is not only a statement of confidence in Ishiba nationally, but within the LDP, there was great dissatisfaction with his policy choices, both with regards to the United States and China. And because of this, I think that he will not be around in the coming weeks moving forward.
And Professor, now he has said that he will stay in office as he has U.S. tariffs talks coming up. Now, how is Japan's economic situation compared to Europe's, especially in terms of inflation and tariff-related concerns?
It's serious. If this was a business, he would have been fired, restructured out of his position. Inflation is up, wages are flat, and this follows almost 30 years of general stagnation within the economy. In this sense, since his election back in September 2024, Prime Minister Ishiba really hasn't nudged the Japanese economy moving in a better direction. And the tariffs that are likely to be applied on August 1st are going to impact Japan's signature industries, in particular the automobile industry, which really is represented in a very large way within Japan's GDP. In this sense, I think Prime Minister Ishiba's clock is really ticking quicker and quicker, and he's likely to lose his position as the president of the LDP, the Democratic Party. And as a result, we're going to see a new prime minister come in the coming weeks to take over and reset the negotiations with the United States and likely reset the relationship with China as well.
And in Europe, we have also seen several governments struggle with public discontent recently. And how do you think Japan's political landscape compares to European democracies in handling voter dissatisfaction, especially in terms of accountability?
What we're seeing globally, and this is included in Japan, is that the economies are not working anymore for the middle class. We see great amounts of wealth being amassed in the upper part of the economy and people being impoverished in the middle class in lower parts of the economy. This is only going to increase with introductions of new technologies such as AI, but also as the global economy starts to restructure its supply chains away from China. And this means that inflation is with us for 10 to 15 years. In this sense, I think the vote against the ruling Democratic Party is consistent with other political movements around the world, whether it's the United States and the Magna movement, or the liberal minority in Canada, or the minority in Australia, and of course in the EU. Many citizens are looking for a government that can deliver economic change, prosperity, and sustainability in their economies in the wake of these really fundamental changes in how the global economy is going to work. In this sense, Japanese are not only in voting against the ruling party, but they're voting for change. The question is what change is going to what change is going to come, and if those new political parties that have emerged, or these more right-leaning political parties, are able to deliver the economic goods that ordinary citizens are longing for. This is a really difficult question to answer today, but the evidence suggests that nobody has the solution for the economic challenges that we're facing today.
Thank you very much, Professor Nagi, for joining us all the way from Budapest. Now we move on to our next news. The investigation into the deadly Jeju air crash in South Korea has revealed clear evidence that pilots shut off the less damaged left engine after a bird strike. Sources say cockpit data and wreckage showed the pilots mistakenly turned off the wrong engine just before landing. The Boeing 737-800 crashed in December at Muan Airport, killing 179 people. The right engine was more damaged by the bird strike, but pilots shut off the left engine, worsening the situation. Families of victims have objected to the investigation's focus on pilot error, urging officials to also examine the runway embankment where the plane crashed. The pilots' union also accuses investigators of scapegoating the crew and ignoring other factors. South Korea's Aviation and Railway Accident Investigation Board has delayed releasing the full report amid these disputes. Now we're joined by Captain Kishore Chinta. He's an aviation safety expert, former military aviator. Thank you, Captain, for joining us today. Welcome to NewsX World. Now, this investigation into the Jeju air crash suggests that pilots shut off the wrong engine. Given this new revelation, how significant is pilot error in aviation accidents? And what are the typical safeguards in place to prevent such mistakes?
Thank you for having me on your show on NewsX. Human factors, as we call it, include pilots, engineers, anyone involved with the operation of an airplane. Human factors are a major factor in any accident leading to the eventual accident. An accident is not a simple, straightforward, one single cause. It's always a systemic error which has caused an accident. That is why in aircraft safety, or even globally, safety is considered as a Swiss cheese model, you know. So multiple layers of the Swiss cheese and the holes have to align for one disastrous accident to happen. So yes, saying that human factor caused an accident is unrealistic. Coming to the Jeju Airlines accident, it is a classic example of, trying to apportion blame on the pilots who are not there to defend themselves. The mere factor that, if you see the wording of Reuters report and their undeclared source, is that less damaged engine. How do the pilots sitting in the aircraft assess damage to a particular engine? You go by what are the cockpit indications. If it says a particular engine has to be shut down, you shut it down. There is no two ways about it. You can't go into the engine and say, hey, it was less damaged or more damaged. It's all based on the cockpit indications. If the cockpit indications did not mandate the left engine to be shut down and still they shut it down, please show it us with the adequate flight data record and the cockpit voice recorder recordings. Otherwise, there is no business of even, apportioning any blame other than the fact that the pilots landed on the runway. They overshot the runway, and why not focus on why there was an embankment which was eventually hit and caused to the post-crash fire and casualties. That should be what they should be focusing upon. And once again, this is a classic Boeing driven accident investigation, where Boeing would not like to take on any responsibility whatsoever on why and what happened with those engines. If there were bird remnants in the left engine also, what was the extent of damage? Did it require the engine to be shut down or not shut down? What were the event-based cockpit indications for that engine to be shut down by the crew? Nobody in their sane mind as a pilot would shut down an engine which is perfectly fine and working. If they had aborted and there were ECAM warnings or ECAS warnings in the cockpit, which mandated that the engine needed to be shut down, they would follow it as per the memory items at that stage of it. There is no other way why an engine would be shut down. If it was a single engine which had a problem and they shut down the good engine, then we can understand. But both the engines had significant bird damage. So I would say that, even though human factors play a role, we have to look into every single aspect before finalizing the final investigation report.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Captain Kishore Chinta, for joining us and sharing that insight. Now we move on to our next news. U.S. Attorney Alan Dershowitz has called on the Justice Department to release more files in the Jeffrey Epstein sex trafficking case. In an interview with Fox News, Dershowitz urged the unsealing of FBI 302 forms, summaries of witness interviews, and suggested granting Ghislaine Maxwell immunity to testify before Congress. He claimed names of powerful figures were deliberately redacted This push comes as federal prosecutors move to unseal grand jury transcripts. Epstein died in custody in 2019. Maxwell is serving a 20-year sentence and is seeking a Supreme Court appeal. Now we're joined by Madhav Nalapat. He's an editorial director at the Sunday Guardian. Thank you, Madam, for joining us today. Good to see you. Now, Alan has called on the Justice Department to release more files for this Epstein sex trafficking case. What do you think of the major political impact would be if these files were unsealed, and could this intensify public pressure on the Justice Department?
Look, there's no question that Alan Dershowitz is not just any ordinary lawyer. I mean, not that any lawyer is ordinary, but Alan Dershowitz is a very well-known person, and frankly, he's very well-respected, and obviously he's a person who's an insider, and he knows a lot about what is going on. So he's called for release of certain files, and it's going to be very embarrassing if those files are not released. The public have a right to know about the Epstein matter. It involves the most terrible, one of the most terrible crimes of all, which is trafficking in children. And from that point of view, the public have a right to know. So Alan Dershowitz calling for release of the files, he must know something that is in the files that we don't know. And the reality of the situation is it cannot be ignored. And if it is ignored, then it could very well lead to a lot of complications for President Trump. After all, it is well known that President Trump basically, is the boss of the Attorney General, and she essentially reports to him. Normally, Attorney Generals are independent of the President, but Pam Bondi is completely, she listens to Trump. She's a loyalist, like the other cabinet picks. But the reality is there's no question that this is a very important voice that has been raised, and it's going to be very embarrassing if the files are not released. And I think the public have a right to know, and I think within the Republican Party also, the majority opinion is that the public have a right to know, and the party should not be seen as hiding the truth. So when you talk about truth, in fact, President Trump's own, platform, social media platform, is called Truth Social. So let's be truthful about this. Let's come out about the Epstein files and see what they contain.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much, Madhav Nalapat, for joining us and sharing your insight. Now we move on to our next news. U.S. President Donald Trump has renewed his demand for the Washington Commanders to change their name back to the Redskins. Trump threatened to block the team's stadium deal in Washington if they don't comply, though it's unclear how he could enforce this. The Commanders left Washington in 1997, but plan to return to the district with a new stadium at the old RFK site. Pending approval by the D.C. Council, Mayor Muriel Bowser has urged swift council action with public hearing set for July 29. Trump also called on the Cleveland Guardians to revert their formal name, the Indians, claiming that Native Americans want the change. Both team name changes were made amid criticism of racist stereotypes. Trump insisted times have changed and urged team owners to get it done, tying his appeal to his political slogan. Now we move on to Europe. A government review has ruled out nationalizing the water industry in England and Wales. Despite criticism over pollution, debt, and dividends, the report says the current regulatory system isn't working and calls for stronger rules, including separate regulators for England and Wales. It also says tougher action is needed to tackle sewage dumping and boost investment. But ministers say public ownership is not the answer, despite growing political pressure. Now we're joined by Joshua Barnes, Thank you, Joshua, for joining us. What more can you tell us about this situation in UK?
Well, yes, Asuma, the situation around water companies has been a contentious topic for a long time. Public discontent over the rising costs of water bills, but also after studies and reviews into the level of pollutants in many of the rivers across the United Kingdom. Now, individual sewage leakages are at play. We've had issues surrounding infrastructure issues, but this also goes into the amount of sewage that is knowingly being pumped into the waterways of the United Kingdom. Questions raised, and this report is really looking into that. It's a multifaceted report that is looking at the water industry in the United Kingdom as a whole. Now, this report has clearly said that the current governing body, known as Ofwats, need abolishing and a shift is needed. But as you've mentioned, the government have spoken out and said that they're not going to nationalise the water systems. To provide some context, each region within the United Kingdom is operated by a separate water company. Now, these have their own pricing, have their own issues, and price increases is a huge topic of conversation amongst residents. This report also suggesting that water bills could go up by as much as 30% in some regions, and it could be the consumers that are taking the cost of these repairs and infrastructure changes that are needing in a system that is outdated. One for us to definitely keep an eye on here on NewsX World.
Thank you very much, Joshua, for sharing that. Now we move on to our next news. US President Donald Trump posted an AI-generated video on Truth Social showing Barack Obama being arrested by the FBI in the Oval Office. The fake video ends with Obama in jail. Critics slammed Trump for not issuing a disclaimer. This comes after Trump accused Obama of high-level election fraud. Former National Intelligence Director Tulsi Gabbard also revealed striking evidence of Obama officials manufacturing the Trump-Russia collusion theory after the 2016 election. Gabbard called for a trial, claiming intelligence was politicized to undermine Trump's presidency and subvert democratic will. Now let's look at some stories from the world of business. Asian shares are mixed and U.S. futures have edged higher after U.S. stocks posted their third straight winning week. Japan's Liberal Democrats have lost majorities in both houses for the first time in over 60 years, leading to political instability under Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba. Chinese shares rose after the central bank kept interest rates unchanged, while South Korea's Kospi and India's Sensex saw gains. Oil prices remained stable and the dollar rose against the yen. Markets are expecting updates on U.S. home sales and jobless claims this week. The French cosmetics industry is developing a strategy in response to the threats of a trade war initiated by U.S. President Donald Trump. French cosmetics exports worth 22.2 billion euros in 2024 have nearly doubled in the last decade, making it vulnerable to U.S. tariffs. Market intelligence firm Asteris outlines 3 possible scenarios: minimal impact from general tariffs, significant damage from targeted measures, and a full-scale trade war. French industry leaders remain cautious, highlighting the strengths of high-end products. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.